Do you ever feel like confidence is something everyone else seems to understand, but no one can clearly explain to you? You hear people say things like, just believe in yourself, or be confident, as if confidence is a switch you can turn on at will. But when you try to follow that advice, something feels missing, because deep down, you know confidence doesn't work that way. It doesn't appear just because you want it to. You might have noticed this in your own life. There are moments when you feel strong, certain, and capable, and then there are moments when doubt creeps in, hesitation takes over, and suddenly, everything feels uncertain. It's confusing. It makes you question yourself. And more importantly, it makes you wonder if confidence is something you either have or don't have. But here's the truth. No one clearly tells you. Confidence is not random. It is not luck. And it is definitely not a personality trait reserved for a select few. There is a formula behind it. A quiet, invisible formula that operates in the background of your daily life. And once you understand this formula, everything changes. The problem is, most people are looking in the wrong place. They search for confidence in public moments, in how they speak, how they appear, how others react to them. They think confidence is about performance, about showing up strong, looking certain, acting fearless. But that's not confidence. That's performance under pressure, and performance without foundation eventually collapses. Real confidence is built long before those public moments ever happen. It is created in silence, in repetition, in small decisions that no one else sees. It is shaped in the way you talk to yourself, the way you follow through on your own promises, and the way you handle discomfort when there is no audience. Think about it carefully. Every time you say you will do something and you don't follow through, you weaken your own trust in yourself. And every time you act, despite resistance, despite doubt, despite discomfort, you strengthen something internally, something quiet, something powerful. That is where confidence begins to take shape. But here's where it becomes even more interesting. The formula of confidence is not based on feeling confident first. It is based on acting, proving, and reinforcing, again and again, until confidence becomes a natural byproduct. This is what most people never realize. They wait to feel ready before they act. But the formula works in reverse. You act first. You build proof, and then confidence follows. Do you see the shift? Instead of asking, "How do I feel confident?" the real question becomes, "What am I doing daily that proves I can trust myself?" Because confidence is nothing more than self-trust in action. And self-trust is built through evidence, not intention. Now think about how powerful this is. It means confidence is not out of your control. It means you don't need permission, validation, or perfect conditions. You don't need to wait for the right moment or the right feeling. You only need to understand the formula and apply it consistently in your private life. The truth is, the world only sees the final result. The confident voice, the calm decisions, the steady presence. But what it doesn't see is the formula running quietly underneath, the repetition, the discipline, the small consistent actions, the private victories, the internal proof. And this is why so many people struggle, because they try to copy the visible outcome without understanding the invisible process behind it. They try to look confident without building the structure that supports it. And without that structure, confidence becomes fragile, temporary, and easily shaken. But once you understand the real formula, everything changes. You stop chasing confidence, and you start building it. You stop relying on feelings, and you start relying on proof. You stop performing, and you start becoming. So the question is not whether you can be confident. The question is, are you willing to follow the formula that actually creates it, even when no one is watching? Chapter 1, the hidden equation behind confidence. Do you realize that every time you think about confidence, you are often focusing on the surface, not the structure beneath it? You are looking at the visible expression, how you speak, how you carry yourself, how others perceive you, but missing the deeper mechanism that creates it. And because of that, confidence feels unpredictable, unstable, something that comes and goes without warning. But what if you could see it differently? What if confidence wasn't a feeling you chase, but a result you generate? What if there was an equation, quiet, consistent, always working in the background, that determines how confident you feel at any given moment? Once you begin to understand this, you stop guessing, you stop hoping, and you start building. Confidence is not magic. It is not random. It is not something reserved for a certain type of person. It follows a pattern, a structure, a formula that is built on 3 core elements: action, proof, and self-trust. You may not have seen it clearly before, but you have experienced it many times in your life. Think about a moment when you felt completely certain about something. Maybe it was a task you had done repeatedly. Maybe it was a situation you had prepared for thoroughly. In that moment, you didn't question yourself. You didn't hesitate. You didn't overthink. You simply acted. That feeling, that calm certainty, is what confidence truly is. And it didn't come from nowhere. It came from accumulated proof. Now consider the opposite. A moment where you felt unsure, hesitant, maybe even anxious. Not because you lacked ability, but because you lacked evidence. You hadn't practiced enough. You hadn't followed through consistently. You didn't have enough internal proof to support your belief in yourself, and so your mind filled the gap with doubt. This is the hidden equation at work. Action creates proof. Proof builds self-trust. Self-trust produces confidence. But most people interrupt this process. They wait for confidence before taking action. They want certainty before they begin. And because they wait, they never gather the proof needed to build self-trust. The equation never completes, and confidence never stabilizes. Do you see what this means for you? It means the starting point is not confidence. The starting point is action. Not perfect action, not public action, just consistent, deliberate action, especially when you don't feel ready. Because every time you act despite hesitation, and you are feeding the equation, you are creating proof. And proof is powerful. It is not based on opinion. It is not based on what others say. It is based on what you have done. Every completed task, every small promise kept, every moment you pushed through resistance, these become evidence. And your mind collects that evidence, quietly building a case for your capability. Over time, something begins to shift. You stop questioning whether you can do something, because you have already proven that you can handle similar situations. Your internal dialogue changes. Instead of doubt, there is a quiet certainty. Instead of hesitation, there is a calm readiness. This is self-trust. And self-trust is the core of real confidence. Not loud, not performative, not dependent on attention, just a steady, an internal knowing that you can rely on yourself. But here is where most people make another mistake. They underestimate the importance of small actions. They think confidence comes from big achievements, major wins, dramatic breakthroughs. But the truth is, confidence is built in the smallest moments. The moments when you decide to do something you said you would do. The moments when you choose discipline over comfort. The moments when you act, even when it would be easier not to. Each of these moments may seem insignificant on its own, but together they form a pattern, and that pattern becomes your identity. You begin to see yourself differently, not because you told yourself to, but because you have evidence to support it. Now think about the opposite pattern. Every time you delay, avoid, or break your own commitment, or you are also feeding the equation, but in reverse. You are creating negative proof. and that proof weakens self-trust. Over time, this leads to hesitation, doubt, and inconsistency, not because you lack potential, but because your internal evidence does not support confidence. So the real question becomes, what kind of proof are you creating daily? Because whether you realize it or not, you are always feeding the equation. Every action you take or avoid contributes to the way you see yourself. And the way you see yourself determines how confidently you act. This is why confidence cannot be faked for long. You might be able to perform temporarily, to appear confident in certain situations. But without real proof underneath, that confidence becomes fragile. It breaks under pressure. It disappears when things don't go as expected. Real confidence is different. It doesn't need to be forced. It doesn't need to be maintained through constant effort. It exists naturally because it is supported by a strong foundation of action and proof. And here is the most important realization. This equation is always available to you. You don't need special conditions. You don't need permission. You don't need to wait for the right time. You only need to start taking actions that align with the person you want to become, and repeat them consistently. At first, it may feel uncomfortable. You may not feel confident while doing it. That is normal. Because you are at the beginning of the equation, you are creating proof, and proof takes time to accumulate. But if you continue, if you keep acting, keep following through, keep building evidence, something begins to change. Slowly, quietly, almost unnoticed at first. You start to trust yourself more. You start to rely on your own actions instead of your feelings, and confidence begins to emerge, not as something you forced, but as something you earned. This is the formula no one talks about, not because it is complicated, but because it is simple, and it requires consistency. It requires you to stop waiting and start acting. It requires you to focus less on how you feel and more on what you do. So now, ask yourself honestly, what actions are you taking today that will become proof tomorrow? Because that proof is the foundation of your confidence. Chapter 2. Why feelings can't be the starting point. Do you notice how often you wait to feel ready before you begin? You tell yourself that you will start when you feel confident, when the doubt disappears, when the hesitation fades. It feels logical. It feels safe. But if you look closely, this pattern quietly holds you in place. Because the feeling you are waiting for is not the beginning of confidence. It is the result of something you haven't done yet. This is where most people misunderstand the process. They treat confidence like an emotion that must come first, as if action should follow feeling. But the reality works in reverse. Feeling confident is not the cause of action. It is the effect of repeated action. And when you wait for the effect before creating the cause, nothing moves. Think about your own experiences. How many times have you delayed something important because you didn't feel ready? You may have told yourself you needed more time, more clarity, more motivation. But what you were really waiting for was a feeling, a sense of certainty that never arrived. And because it didn't arrive, the action never happened. Now imagine if you approached it differently. Instead of asking yourself whether you feel confident enough to act, you ask whether you are willing to act despite not feeling confident. That single shift changes everything, because it removes the dependency on emotion and replaces it with intention. Feelings are unstable. They rise and fall, influenced by circumstances, thoughts, and even small changes in your environment. If your actions depend on your feelings, your progress becomes inconsistent. Some days you move forward, other days you stay still. And over time, this inconsistency weakens your trust in yourself. But action is different. Action can be chosen, even when your feelings are uncertain. You can decide to move forward regardless of how you feel in that moment. And every time you do, you create something far more valuable than temporary motivation. You create evidence. Do you see how this connects back to the formula? When you act without waiting for the right feeling, you begin to generate proof. That proof doesn't come from emotion, it comes from behavior. It comes from doing what you said you would do, even when it was uncomfortable. And over time, that proof begins to shift how you see yourself. At first, it may feel unnatural. You may act while still feeling doubt. You may move forward while your mind questions you. But that is part of the process. Confidence does not require the absence of doubt. It requires the ability to act in its presence. And this is an important distinction. Many people believe confident individuals do not feel fear or hesitation, but that is not true. The difference is not in what they feel, it is in what they do despite what they feel. They have learned not to wait for emotion to align before taking action, and because they act consistently, they accumulate proof. Over time, this proof changes their internal response. Situations that once felt intimidating begin to feel familiar. Tasks that once triggered hesitation begin to feel manageable. And gradually, the feeling of confidence emerges, not because they chased it, but because they built it. Now consider what happens when you rely on feelings as your guide. You start to avoid discomfort. You delay action. You look for easier paths. And each time you do, you reinforce a pattern of avoidance. When that pattern becomes your internal evidence, and your mind uses that evidence to justify future hesitation. So it's not just about missing opportunities. It's about the identity you are building through repeated choices. Every time you wait for the right feeling, you are teaching yourself that you cannot act without it. And that belief limits you, even if you don't consciously recognize it. But when you act without waiting, when you move forward even while uncertain, you begin to rewrite that pattern. You teach yourself that action is possible without perfect conditions. You prove that you can handle discomfort. And with each repetition, that proof strengthens your internal foundation. There is also something else that happens when you stop relying on feelings. You gain control. Instead of being guided by fluctuating emotions, you are guided by deliberate decisions. You become more consistent, more reliable, more focused. And this consistency becomes one of the strongest sources of confidence, because confidence is not built on occasional success. It is built on repeated follow-through. It is built on knowing that you will do what you said you would do, regardless of how you feel in the moment. That kind of reliability creates deep self-trust. Now ask yourself this: how often have your feelings stopped you from doing something you knew was important? And how different would your progress look if you acted anyway? This is where the real shift begins. Not in changing how you feel, but in changing how you respond to your feelings. Instead of treating them as commands, you begin to see them as temporary signals, information, not instruction. You acknowledge them, but you don't let them decide your actions. At first, this requires effort. You may need to consciously push yourself to act when it feels uncomfortable, but over time, it becomes easier. Not because the discomfort disappears, but because your relationship with it changes. You no longer see it as a barrier. You see it as part of the process. And with each step, you are feeding the equation. You are creating proof. You are strengthening self-trust. And slowly, confidence begins to form, not as a sudden transformation, but as a steady accumulation. This is why feelings cannot be the starting point, because they are unreliable, inconsistent, and reactive. They are not designed to lead, they are designed to respond. Action, however, is different. Action is deliberate. It is consistent. It is within your control. And when you choose action as your starting point, you begin to take control of the entire process. So the next time you catch yourself waiting to feel confident, pause for a moment. Ask yourself a different question. Not, do I feel ready? But, am I willing to act anyway? Because that willingness is where the formula truly begins to work. And once you begin, the rest will follow. Chapter 3. The power of small proof. Do you realize how often you overlook the smallest actions in your life, dismissing them as insignificant? You focus on big goals, major outcomes, and visible success, believing that confidence must come from large achievements. But what if the real foundation of confidence is not built in those big moments at all? What if it is built quietly, in the smallest actions you repeat every single day? And this is where the formula begins to deepen, because once you understand that action creates proof, the next realization becomes even more important. Not all proof needs to be big to be powerful. In fact, the smallest forms of proof are often the most consistent, and consistency is what truly builds confidence. Think about it carefully. Every time you complete something you said you would do, no matter how small, you create evidence. It could be as simple as starting a task on time, finishing what you began, or following through on a commitment you made to yourself. These actions may not seem impressive, but they send a clear message to your mind. You can be trusted. Now imagine this happening not once, but repeatedly. Day after day, you take small actions and follow through. You begin to build a pattern, and that pattern becomes proof. Not just of your ability, but of your reliability. This is where confidence starts to take root, but most people ignore this process. They wait for big wins to feel confident. They think they need to achieve something major before they can believe in themselves. And because those big moments are rare, their confidence remains unstable. It rises when they succeed and falls when they don't. What they fail to see is that confidence built on big moments is fragile. It depends on outcomes, and outcomes are not always within your control, but small actions are. Small actions can be repeated daily, and because they can be repeated, they can be relied upon. This is why small proof is so powerful. It is accessible, it is consistent, and it compounds over time. Do you see how this works? When you take a small action and complete it, you create a single piece of proof. On its own, it may not feel significant, but when you repeat that action again and again, the proof begins to accumulate. And as it accumulates, your perception of yourself begins to change. You stop seeing yourself as someone who tries. You begin to see yourself as someone who follows through. That shift is subtle, but it is powerful. Because once your identity begins to change, your behavior follows naturally. Now consider the opposite. When you ignore small actions, when you delay, avoid, or leave things unfinished, you also create proof. But this proof works against you. It builds a pattern of inconsistency, and over time, that pattern weakens your self-trust. So the difference between confidence and doubt is not always found in big decisions. It is often found in the smallest choices you make throughout your day. The choice to start, the choice to continue, the choice to finish. Each of these choices is an opportunity to create proof. And here is something important to understand. Small proof does not require perfection. You do not need to perform flawlessly. You only need to act and follow through, because confidence is not built on perfection. It is built on consistency. This means you can begin at any point. You do not need ideal conditions. You do not need to feel motivated. You simply need to take a small action and complete it. And then repeat that process. At first, the impact may feel minimal. You may not notice a significant change in how you feel, but something is happening beneath the surface. Your mind is recording every action, every completion, and every follow-through. And slowly it begins to build a case, a collection of evidence that supports a new belief about yourself. I can rely on myself. That belief is not created through words, it is created through proof. Over time, this belief becomes stronger. It begins to influence how you approach challenges, how you handle pressure, and how you respond to uncertainty. Situations that once caused hesitation begin to feel manageable, not because they are easier, but because you trust your ability to handle them. This is the compounding effect of small proof. It starts quietly, it builds slowly, but eventually it becomes undeniable. Now think about how this applies to your daily life. Every task, every habit, every decision is an opportunity to reinforce or weaken your confidence. You are constantly feeding the equation, whether you realize it or not. The key is to become intentional, to recognize that small actions are not meaningless. They are the building blocks of your internal foundation. When you begin to treat them that way, your perspective changes. You stop looking for dramatic breakthroughs and start focusing on consistent progress. You stop waiting for big opportunities and start creating small wins. And those small wins begin to shape something much bigger. They shape your identity. You begin to see yourself as someone who acts, someone who follows through, someone who can be trusted. And once that identity is established, confidence no longer feels like something you are trying to achieve. It feels like something that naturally belongs to you. But this only happens if you respect the process, if you commit to small actions, even when they seem insignificant, if you continue, even when the results are not immediately visible, because confidence is not built in moments of recognition. It is built in moments of repetition. So now, consider this carefully. What small actions are you overlooking today? What opportunities for proof are you ignoring because they seem too minor to matter? Those are the exact moments where confidence begins, not in the extraordinary, but in the ordinary, not in the spotlight, but in the quiet repetition of doing what you said you would do. And if you begin to take those small actions seriously, if you begin to treat them as the foundation of your confidence, you will start to notice a shift. Not all at once, not dramatically, but steadily. You will feel more certain, more stable, more in control. Not because something outside of you changed, but because you finally started building proof from within. Chapter 4. Breaking the Cycle of Empty Confidence. Do you ever notice how easy it is to feel confident for a short moment and then lose it just as quickly? You might feel strong after a good day, after a small success, or after receiving validation. But then something shifts. A challenge appears, a mistake happens, or uncertainty creeps in, and suddenly that confidence disappears. It feels inconsistent, unreliable, almost like confidence is something that comes and goes without your control. But if you look deeper, you will begin to see that this is not random. There is a pattern behind it, and that pattern is what creates what can be called empty confidence. Empty confidence looks real on the surface. It can sound convincing, it can even feel powerful for a short time. But underneath, it lacks foundation. It is not built on consistent proof. It is built on temporary emotion, external validation, or isolated success. And because of that, it cannot sustain itself. Think about how this shows up in your life. You might feel confident when things are going well, when you are in a familiar environment, or when you are receiving positive feedback. In those moments, confidence feels natural. But as soon as the situation changes, when pressure increases, when uncertainty appears, or when something does not go as planned, that confidence begins to weaken. Why does this happen? Because it was never anchored in something stable. It was not built through the formula. It was not supported by consistent action and proof. It was a reaction, and not a foundation. This is the cycle many people get trapped in. They experience short bursts of confidence, followed by periods of doubt. They try to recreate that confident feeling through motivation, inspiration, or external validation. And for a moment, it works. But then the cycle repeats. This cycle is exhausting. It creates frustration. It makes you question yourself. And most importantly, it prevents you from building real, lasting confidence. To break this cycle, you must first recognize it. You must see the difference between confidence that is built and confidence that is borrowed. Borrowed confidence comes from outside sources. It comes from praise, approval, temporary success, or emotional highs. It feels good, but it is not reliable, because it depends on factors you cannot fully control. Built confidence, on the other hand, comes from within. It is created through consistent action, repeated proof, and self-trust. It does not depend on external conditions, and because of that, it remains stable even when circumstances change. Now ask yourself honestly, which type of confidence have you been relying on? If your confidence rises and falls quickly, if it disappears under pressure, or if it depends on how others respond to you, then it is likely built on unstable ground. But here is the important part. This is not a limitation, it is an opportunity. Because once you recognize the pattern, you can begin to change it. The first step is to stop chasing the feeling of confidence, because that feeling is not the goal, it is the result. When you chase the feeling, you become dependent on temporary conditions. But when you focus on the process, you begin to build something real. That process is simple, but it requires consistency. You return to the formula, you take action, you create proof, you build self-trust, and you repeat. At first, this may feel less exciting than chasing motivation or external validation. It may feel slower, more deliberate, less dramatic. But this is exactly why it works. Because it is not based on intensity, it is based on consistency. Over time, something begins to change. The ups and downs start to stabilize. You no longer rely on external events to feel confident. Instead, you rely on your internal proof, and that proof does not disappear when things become difficult. This is how you break the cycle, not by forcing yourself to feel confident, but by removing your dependence on feeling confident in the first place. Now consider how powerful this is. It means that even on your worst days, even when you feel uncertain, tired, or unmotivated, you can still take action. And every time you do, you reinforce real confidence. This creates a new pattern. Instead of waiting for confidence to act, you act to create confidence. And with each repetition, this pattern becomes stronger. Eventually, the cycle of empty confidence is replaced by a steady, reliable foundation. You no longer experience extreme highs followed by sharp drops. Instead, you develop a quiet, consistent sense of certainty. This kind of confidence is not loud. It does not need to prove itself. It does not depend on recognition. It simply exists, supported by a strong internal structure. But this only happens if you are willing to let go of the illusion, or the illusion that confidence should feel strong all the time, the illusion that you need to feel ready before you begin, the illusion that external validation defines your ability. Once you let go of these ideas, you free yourself from the cycle. You stop chasing temporary feelings and start building permanent strength. Now, reflect on your own experience. How many times have you relied on motivation, validation, or short-term success to feel confident? And how often has that confidence faded when conditions changed? That pattern is not your fault. It is simply the result of focusing on the wrong part of the process. But now you see it clearly. Confidence is not something you maintain by holding on to a feeling. It is something you sustain by continuing the process that created it. So the next time you feel a temporary boost of confidence, do not rely on it. Do not assume it will last. Instead, use it as a reminder to return to the formula, to take action, to build proof, to strengthen self-trust, because that is what makes confidence real. And that is how you break the cycle permanently. Chapter 5. Discipline. The engine of the formula. Do you notice how everything you've understood so far leads back to one unavoidable truth? Action creates proof. Proof builds self-trust, and self-trust produces confidence. But there is a hidden force that determines whether this process actually continues or quietly collapses. That force is discipline. Without discipline, the formula breaks. Not immediately, not dramatically, but slowly, quietly, almost unnoticed. You take action for a day, maybe two. When you feel motivated for a short period, you create a small amount of proof, but then something shifts. You skip a step, you delay, you tell yourself you'll do it later, and just like that, the chain is interrupted. This is where most people lose momentum, not because they lack ability, not because they don't understand what to do, but because they rely on motivation instead of discipline. Motivation feels powerful, but it is temporary. It comes in bursts. It depends on mood, environment, and emotion. When it's there, action feels easy, but when it fades, everything becomes harder. And if your progress depends on motivation, your progress becomes inconsistent. Discipline is different. Discipline does not depend on how you feel. It does not require excitement or inspiration. It is a decision, a commitment to act regardless of your emotional state. And because it is not tied to feeling, it remains stable. This is why discipline is the engine of the confidence formula. It keeps the process moving, even when motivation disappears. It ensures that action continues, proof accumulates, and self-trust strengthens over time. Now think about your own experience. There are moments when you know exactly what you need to do. The task is clear. The next step is obvious, but something inside you resists. You don't feel like starting. You hesitate. You delay. That moment is where discipline becomes critical, because confidence is not built when things are easy. It is built in those exact moments, when you act despite resistance, when you follow through despite discomfort, when you do what you said you would do, even when you don't feel like it. Each of these moments creates powerful proof, not just proof of your ability, but proof of your reliability. And reliability is what transforms action into self-trust. Do you see how this works? If you only act when you feel motivated, your proof becomes inconsistent. Some days you follow through, other days you don't. And this inconsistency weakens your internal foundation. You begin to doubt whether you can rely on yourself, because your behavior is unpredictable. But when you act through discipline, something changes. Your actions become consistent. Your behavior becomes predictable. And over time, this consistency builds a strong sense of internal trust. You begin to know, not hope, not guess, but know, that you will do what you said you would do, that knowing is confidence. But discipline is often misunderstood. Many people think it requires extreme effort, constant pressure or rigid control. They imagine it as something harsh or restrictive. But real discipline is not about intensity, it is about consistency. It is not about doing everything perfectly. It is about doing something reliably. Even small actions, when repeated with discipline, become powerful, because they keep the formula active. They ensure that proof continues to accumulate. And as long as proof is being created, confidence is being built. Now consider what happens when discipline is absent. You rely on how you feel. You act when it's convenient. You avoid when it's uncomfortable. And over time, this creates a pattern of inconsistency. That pattern becomes your internal evidence. And your mind uses that evidence to shape your self-image. You begin to see yourself as someone who starts but doesn't finish, who intends but doesn't follow through. And this perception weakens your confidence, even if you are capable of much more. So the issue is not your ability. It is the consistency of your actions. This is why discipline matters more than talent, more than motivation, more than even initial confidence. Because discipline determines whether the process continues long enough to produce results. At first, building discipline may feel challenging. You may need to push yourself. you may need to override your natural tendency to avoid discomfort. But with repetition, discipline becomes easier. Not because the tasks change, but because your identity begins to shift. You start to see yourself as someone who follows through, someone who acts regardless of how they feel. And once that identity is established, discipline becomes less of an effort and more of a habit. This is where the real transformation happens, because when discipline becomes part of who you are, the formula runs automatically. You no longer need to think about taking action, you just do it. You no longer question whether you will follow through, you already know. And this certainty strengthens your confidence at a deep level. Now reflect on this carefully. How often have you relied on motivation to move forward? And how often has that left you stuck when motivation disappeared? The solution is not to find more motivation. It is to build more discipline, because discipline ensures that you continue even when it's difficult. It ensures that you create proof even when you don't feel like it, and it ensures that your confidence is built on something real, not something temporary. This is the quiet power of discipline. It does not seek attention, it does not create dramatic moments, but it builds something far more valuable, a stable, reliable foundation for confidence. So the next time you feel resistance, do not wait for motivation. Do not look for the right feeling. Instead, make a simple decision. Act anyway, because in that moment, you are not just completing a task, you are strengthening the engine that drives your confidence. Chapter 6. Facing discomfort as proof. Do you notice how quickly you try to move away from discomfort? The moment something feels difficult, uncertain, or slightly painful, there is an instinct to avoid it. You delay, distract yourself, or choose an easier path. It feels natural, it feels protective. But what if this instinct, this constant movement away from discomfort, is quietly preventing you from building real confidence? Because here is something most people never fully understand. Discomfort is not the enemy of confidence. It is the raw material. Every time you face something uncomfortable and move through it, you create one of the strongest forms of proof available to you. Not surface-level proof, not temporary validation, but deep internal evidence that you can handle more than you thought. And that kind of proof changes you in ways that comfort never can. Think about it carefully. The moments that shape you the most are not the easy ones. They are the moments when you felt resistance but acted anyway, when you felt uncertain but continued, and when you wanted to step back, but instead you moved forward. In those moments, something important happens. You expand your capacity. You show yourself that discomfort does not control you. And with each repetition, that realization becomes stronger. Now consider the opposite. Each time you avoid discomfort, you also create proof. But this proof works against you. It tells your mind that discomfort is something to escape, something you cannot handle. And over time, this belief grows stronger, limiting what you are willing to attempt. This is how confidence quietly shrinks, not through failure, but through avoidance. Do you see the difference? Confidence is not built by staying comfortable. It is built by consistently stepping into discomfort and proving that you can handle it. But discomfort is often misunderstood, and you may associate it with extreme situations, high pressure, or major challenges. But in reality, discomfort exists in much smaller moments. It appears when you start something you have been avoiding, when you speak up instead of staying silent, when you continue working even when your energy drops, when you choose discipline over ease. These are the moments that matter, because they are frequent. And because they are frequent, they create repeated opportunities for proof. At first, facing discomfort may feel intense. Your mind may resist. It may try to convince you to stop, to delay, to choose something easier. That resistance is normal, It is part of the process. But the key is not to eliminate discomfort. The key is to change your relationship with it. Instead of seeing discomfort as a signal to stop, you begin to see it as a signal that you are doing something meaningful, something that will create proof, something that will strengthen your internal foundation. This shift is powerful because it transforms how you respond in critical moments. Instead of stepping back, you step forward. Instead of avoiding, you engage. Instead of hesitating, you act. And every time you do, you reinforce a new pattern. I can handle this. That belief is not created through positive thinking. It is created through direct experience, through action, through proof. Over time, this pattern becomes automatic. Situations that once felt uncomfortable begin to feel normal, not because they have changed, but because you have. Your capacity has expanded, your tolerance has increased, your self-trust has strengthened. This is how confidence grows quietly but powerfully. Now consider something important. Facing discomfort does not mean forcing yourself into extreme situations or overwhelming challenges. It means consistently choosing growth over ease in the moments that matter. It means leaning into resistance, not running from it. Even small acts of facing discomfort can have a significant impact. Starting when you don't feel ready, continuing when you feel like stopping, finishing when it would be easier to quit. Each of these actions creates proof, and that proof accumulates. This accumulation is what builds confidence, not a single moment, not a single decision, but a repeated pattern of choosing discomfort over avoidance. But here is where most people hesitate. They believe discomfort should decrease as they become more confident, and they expect things to feel easier, smoother, more comfortable. And while certain tasks may become easier with repetition, discomfort itself does not disappear. It evolves. As you grow, new challenges appear, new levels of uncertainty emerge, and with them, new forms of discomfort. This is not a problem, it is a sign of progress. Because confidence is not about eliminating discomfort, it is about becoming someone who can move through it consistently, someone who does not depend on comfort to take action, someone who uses discomfort as a signal to grow. When you reach this point, something changes. You no longer fear discomfort. You expect it. You understand it. And more importantly, you use it. Every uncomfortable moment becomes an opportunity to act, to prove, to strengthen your internal foundation. And with each opportunity, your confidence deepens. Not in a loud or visible way, but in a quiet, steady way that cannot be easily shaken. Now reflect on your own life. Where are you currently avoiding discomfort? What actions are you delaying because they feel slightly difficult or uncertain? Those are the exact moments where your confidence is waiting to be built. Not in ease, not in comfort, not in familiar routines, but in the decision to move forward despite resistance. Because every time you do that, you are not just completing an action, you are sending a message to yourself, a message that says, I can handle this. And over time, that message becomes a belief. That belief becomes your identity. And that identity becomes your confidence. So the next time you feel discomfort, do not step away from it, step into it, because that is where the real proof is created. Chapter 7. Identity, becoming the proof you create. Do you realize that everything you've been building so far is leading to something deeper than just confidence? It is shaping how you see yourself, not in a temporary way, not in a surface level way, but at the level of identity. And once your identity begins to change, confidence is no longer something you try to create. It becomes something you naturally embody. Up to this point, you've understood the formula. Action creates proof. Proof builds self-trust. Self-trust produces confidence. But there is a final transformation that happens when this process is repeated consistently. The proof you create does not just influence how you feel, it reshapes who you believe you are. Think about this carefully. Every action you take is not just an isolated event, it is a signal, a piece of information that your mind uses to define you. When you act consistently, follow through, and face discomfort, you are not just completing tasks, you are sending repeated messages about your own reliability, capability, and resilience. At first, these messages are subtle. You may not consciously notice them, but over time, they begin to form patterns, and those patterns turn into beliefs. I am someone who follows through. I am someone who can handle discomfort. I am someone who acts, even when it's difficult. These beliefs are not created through repetition of words. They are created through repetition of action. And once they are established, they become part of your identity. This is where confidence becomes stable, because it is no longer dependent on what you do in a single moment. It is based on who you believe yourself to be. Now consider the opposite. When your actions are inconsistent, when you avoid discomfort, when you fail to follow through, you are also creating signals, and those signals form a different identity. I am someone who hesitates. I am someone who avoids difficulty. I am someone who starts but doesn't finish. These beliefs may not be consciously chosen, but they are formed through repeated behavior. And once they become part of your identity, they influence how you act in the future. Do you see how powerful this is? Your identity is not fixed. It is not something you are born with. It is something you build, slowly, quietly, through repeated action. And every day, you are either strengthening or weakening the identity that supports confidence. This is why the formula matters so much, because it is not just about creating confidence in specific situations. It is about creating an identity that naturally produces confidence in any situation. When you reach this level, something shifts internally. You stop questioning whether you can handle something. You stop overanalyzing every decision. You stop waiting for the right feeling, because your identity already answers those questions for you. You act because that is who you are. You follow through because that is who you are. You face discomfort because that is who you are. And when action becomes aligned with identity, consistency becomes effortless. But this transformation does not happen suddenly. It is built through repetition, through small actions repeated daily, through discipline, through facing discomfort, through creating proof again and again. At first, you may feel like you are forcing yourself, acting against your natural tendencies. But with time, something changes. The actions that once felt difficult begin to feel normal. The resistance decreases, and your behavior starts to align with your new identity. This is the moment when confidence becomes natural, not because you are trying to be confident, but because your identity supports it. Now consider what this means for you. It means you do not need to focus on confidence directly. You do not need to constantly think about how you appear, how you sound, or how others perceive you. Instead, you focus on your actions, on your discipline, on your willingness to face discomfort, because those actions are shaping your identity, and your identity is shaping your confidence. This is a much more powerful approach, because it removes the pressure of trying to feel or appear a certain way. Instead, it gives you control over something concrete, your behavior. And behavior, when repeated consistently, becomes identity. There is also something important to understand about identity. Once it is established, it becomes self-reinforcing. When you see yourself as someone who follows through, you are more likely to continue following through. When you see yourself as someone who can handle discomfort, you are more likely to face it again. This creates a positive cycle. Your actions reinforce your identity, and your identity reinforces your actions. And together, they strengthen your confidence. But this also means that if you are not intentional, you can reinforce the wrong identity. Patterns of avoidance, inconsistency, and hesitation can become ingrained if they are repeated often enough. So the key is awareness, to recognize that every action matters, not because of the immediate result, but because of the identity it is reinforcing. Now ask yourself this: what kind of identity are your current actions building? Are you reinforcing someone who follows through, who acts despite discomfort, who can be trusted? Or are you reinforcing patterns that weaken your confidence over time? This question is not meant to judge you. It is meant to give you clarity. Because once you are aware, you can choose differently. You can choose actions that align with the identity you want to build. And you can choose consistency over convenience. You can choose discipline over ease. And with each choice, you strengthen that identity. Over time, this becomes who you are. And when confidence is rooted in identity, it becomes unshakable. It is no longer dependent on outcomes, circumstances, or validation. It exists because it is supported by a consistent pattern of behavior. So the next time you take action, remember this: you are not just completing a task, you are shaping your identity, and that identity is the foundation of your confidence. Chapter 8. Consistency over intensity. Do you notice how often you are drawn to moments of intensity? The sudden bursts of motivation, the strong emotional drive, the desire to change everything at once. In those moments you feel powerful, you feel ready, you feel like this time, everything will be different. And for a short period, it often is. You take action, you push harder, you commit fully. It feels like progress is happening quickly. But then, just as quickly as it started, the intensity fades, your energy drops, your focus weakens, and slowly you return to old patterns. This cycle is common. It feels productive, but it rarely leads to lasting confidence, because confidence is not built in moments of intensity. It is built through consistency. Intensity is emotional. It is driven by feeling, and as you already understand, feelings are unstable. They change. They rise and fall. When you rely on intensity, your progress becomes tied to those fluctuations. You move forward when you feel strong, and you slow down when you don't. Consistency is different. It is not dependent on how you feel. It is built on repetition, on showing up again and again, regardless of your emotional state. And because it is not tied to feeling, it becomes reliable. This is why consistency is far more powerful than intensity when it comes to building confidence. Think about the formula again. Action creates proof. Proof builds self-trust. Self-trust produces confidence. Now ask yourself, what strengthens this process more? Occasional intense action or repeated consistent action? The answer is clear. Consistency ensures that proof is created regularly, and regular proof strengthens self-trust in a stable, predictable way. Over time, this creates a solid foundation of confidence that does not depend on temporary bursts of effort. Now consider what happens when you rely on intensity. You create a large amount of action in a short period. You generate some proof, but then, when the intensity fades, the action stops. And when the action stops, the proof stops. This breaks the formula. It interrupts the process, and without continuous proof, self-trust cannot grow consistently. This is why intensity often leads to frustration. You feel like you are making progress, but it does not last. You start strong, but you struggle to maintain it. And over time, this creates a pattern of starting and stopping. That pattern becomes your internal evidence, and that evidence weakens your confidence. But when you shift your focus to consistency, everything changes. You stop trying to do everything at once. You stop relying on motivation. You stop chasing emotional highs. Instead, you commit to doing something regularly, no matter how small. At first, this may feel less exciting, and it may even feel slow, but this is exactly why it works. Because it is sustainable. Consistency allows you to keep the formula active over long periods of time. It ensures that action continues, proof accumulates, and self-trust strengthens steadily. Now think about how this applies to your daily life. Instead of asking yourself how much you can do in a single day, you begin to ask how consistently you can show up. Instead of focusing on big efforts, you focus on repeated efforts. Instead of pushing yourself to extremes, you commit to manageable, repeatable actions. This shift changes everything, because confidence is not built through occasional effort. It is built through repeated behavior, and repeated behavior requires consistency. There is also something important to understand about consistency. It does not require perfection. You do not need to perform at your best every day. You only need to show up. Even on days when your energy is low, when your motivation is weak, when your focus is not at its peak, you can still take a small action, and that action still creates proof. This is what makes consistency so powerful. It allows you to continue building confidence, even when conditions are not ideal. Over time, this creates a strong internal pattern. You begin to see yourself as someone who shows up, regardless of circumstances, someone who continues, even when it is not easy, and that pattern becomes part of your identity. Now compare this to intensity. When you rely on intensity, your identity becomes tied to those high-energy moments. You see yourself as someone who can act strongly, but only under certain conditions. And when those conditions are not present, your confidence weakens. Consistency removes that limitation. It builds an identity that is not dependent on feeling, but on action. This is where real confidence is formed, not in the moments when you feel unstoppable, but in the moments when you continue despite feeling ordinary. Because those moments are repeatable, and what is repeatable can be sustained. Now reflect on your own patterns. Have you been relying on intensity to move forward? Have you been waiting for the right moment, the right feeling, the right level of energy before you act? If so, you are not alone. But now you understand why that approach does not lead to lasting confidence. The solution is not to increase intensity, it is to increase consistency, to create a system of action that you can maintain over time, to focus on repetition rather than bursts, to build proof steadily instead of sporadically. Because confidence is not built in a day, it is built through days, through repeated effort, through consistent action. And once you commit to consistency, something changes. You stop worrying about whether you feel confident. You stop questioning your ability, because you know that as long as you continue, the proof will accumulate. And as long as the proof accumulates, confidence will grow. This creates a sense of stability, a sense of control, a quiet assurance that does not depend on how you feel in any single moment. So the next time you feel a burst of intensity, do not rely on it. Use it as a starting point, not a foundation. Channel it into a consistent pattern of action, because in the end, it is not what you do once that defines your confidence, it is what you do repeatedly. Chapter 9. Leverage your environment without relying on it. Do you notice how much your surroundings influence your actions? The people you spend time with, the spaces you occupy, the routines you follow, all of these can either support your confidence or quietly undermine it. At first glance, it feels like confidence is entirely internal. But if you look closely, you will see that your environment often plays a subtle role in shaping whether you act, follow through, or face discomfort. Many people mistakenly try to control their confidence by controlling their environment. They believe that if the conditions are perfect, if the people are supportive, the situation is favorable, or the circumstances are ideal, they will act confidently. And for a brief moment, this can work. You might feel unstoppable in the right setting, energized by the right atmosphere, or motivated by the right companions. But here's the problem. Environments are not reliable. Conditions change, people come and go, situations fluctuate. If your confidence depends entirely on external factors, it becomes fragile. One shift in circumstance, and you feel unprepared. One absence of support, and your momentum stalls. This is why real confidence cannot be borrowed from your environment. It must be generated within. It must be rooted in your own repeated action, consistent proof, and self-trust. Yet, that does not mean your environment is irrelevant. In fact, your environment can be leveraged strategically to strengthen the formula, but only when it is used intentionally rather than relied upon. Consider the way small cues in your surroundings can prompt action. A clean workspace can encourage focus. A calendar full of clear commitments can guide follow-through. Surrounding yourself with people who challenge you in constructive ways can encourage growth. These are tools, not crutches. They amplify the actions you are already committed to taking. They make the process easier, more manageable, and more sustainable. But the difference is critical. You are still the one doing the work. You are still the one creating the proof. The environment is merely a support system, not the source. Now imagine what happens when you rely on your environment. You wait for the perfect setting, the supportive person, or the motivating situation before acting. That waiting creates inertia. Momentum slows, proof stops accumulating, and confidence, which depends on continued action, begins to erode. This is subtle but powerful. Even small dependencies on external factors can create gaps in your internal proof. Over time, those gaps compound, and eventually, you begin to question your own ability to act independently. Do you see the difference? Confidence grows fastest when it is internally generated but strategically supported. Not dependent, but enhanced. Not reactive, but intentional. Now, consider how this applies to your daily choices. You cannot always control your circumstances, but you can control your response. You can take consistent action regardless of the environment. You can face discomfort even when the situation is less than ideal. This is where discipline intersects with environment. Discipline ensures that your actions continue regardless of conditions. Environment can then amplify those actions, making them easier to sustain and more productive. For example, a supportive peer may encourage you to take on challenges, but the actual courage, the follow-through, the proof, is yours. A well-organized space may make focus easier, but the decision to act consistently comes from within. A positive routine may reduce friction, but proof is still generated through deliberate action. In other words, your environment is a multiplier of what you already commit to doing, not a substitute for it. This distinction is essential because many people misunderstand it. They believe that if they are in the right place or surrounded by the right people, confidence will follow automatically. And when it doesn't, they feel defeated, blaming circumstances rather than examining the formula they are applying or failing to apply. But you now understand that confidence is a product of internal processes, repeated action, accumulated proof, self-trust, discipline, and facing discomfort. Environment is a tool to accelerate that process, not the source of it. Here's how you can leverage it intentionally. Remove friction. Make the small actions you need to take easy to start. Clear distractions. Organize your space. Prepare tools ahead of time. Add cues. Use visual reminders, schedules, and prompts to reinforce your habits. These cues signal action, reducing reliance on fluctuating motivation. Seek constructive influence. Surround yourself with people whose behavior reflects the identity you want to build, not because you imitate them blindly, but because their presence encourages consistency. By doing these things, you use your environment strategically while maintaining internal ownership. You create an ecosystem that reinforces the formula rather than replacing it. Over time, you will notice a subtle shift. Actions that once felt dependent on conditions become independent. You realize that you can perform, succeed, and grow regardless of temporary circumstances. and that realization itself strengthens your proof, deepening your confidence further. Now reflect on your own environment. Where are you relying on external factors to feel capable? Where are you waiting for conditions to be perfect before acting? Those are the gaps where confidence could be quietly weakened. By taking ownership of your actions while using environment as support, you close those gaps. How do you ensure that proof continues to accumulate consistently? And with consistent proof, self-trust grows steadily. This is how internal confidence and strategic environment work together. One creates, the other amplifies. Neither can replace the other. And when you reach this balance, confidence becomes resilient. It no longer wavers when the external world shifts. It is anchored in proof, identity, and consistent action. You begin to act naturally, to follow through automatically, to face challenges without hesitation. And your environment, when leveraged properly, magnifies that ability instead of defining it. So remember this clearly: your confidence is yours to build. Not borrowed, not dependent, not conditional. External factors can help, but they do not create it. The true power comes from inside. In Chapter 10, Mastery, the quiet summit of confidence. Do you realize that all the principles we've discussed, action, proof, discipline, facing discomfort, consistency, identity, and strategic environment, lead to one ultimate destination? Not fame, not external recognition, not even a single defining achievement. The summit of confidence is mastery, and mastery is not a loud display. It is quiet, steady, and deeply internal. Mastery is the point where action and proof have become habitual, where discipline no longer feels like effort, but is embedded in your behavior, where discomfort is expected, embraced, and used as a tool rather than a barrier, where your identity fully aligns with your actions and your confidence no longer fluctuates based on circumstance. At this level, confidence is not something you chase. It is simply who you are. Do you see how rare this is? Many people pursue success, recognition, or visible achievement thinking it will make them confident. But without internal mastery, even those external victories cannot provide lasting assurance. You can have success and still feel doubt because you have not built proof, self-trust, and identity consistently enough to support it. Mastery, however, changes everything. When you reach this point, your confidence is self-reinforcing. Your mind no longer needs constant reassurance, your actions do not depend on motivation, and challenges do not shake your belief in yourself. Think carefully about how this happens. Mastery is cumulative. Every small action you have taken, every moment of discipline, every instance of facing discomfort has built upon the previous ones. It compounds silently, gradually forming an unshakable foundation. And when this foundation is strong enough, it supports not just your confidence, but your ability to act decisively, creatively, and resiliently in every area of life. But here is the subtlety. Mastery is not perfection. It is not a state where you never struggle, never fail, or never feel uncertain. That is impossible. Instead, mastery is the ability to act effectively despite struggle, failure, and uncertainty. It is knowing that you have built enough internal proof to handle whatever arises. This is why mastery feels quiet. It does not need to announce itself. It does not depend on applause or recognition. You do not need to prove it to anyone else because it exists independently within you. And this is why confidence that reaches mastery is eternal, in a sense. Not because the world stays constant, but because your internal foundation is independent of external conditions. Challenges come, situations change, and people shift, but your self-trust remains. Your proof continues to accumulate through action. Your identity is stable, and your confidence is unshakable. Do you see the full cycle now? It starts in private. The small actions, the daily disciplines, the repeated proofs, the moments of facing discomfort. These are all invisible to the world, but critical to the process. You build internally, quietly, without needing validation, applause, or recognition. And over time, these private moments compound into a public reality, steady, reliable, natural confidence. At the summit of mastery, your confidence is no longer about what you do, but about who you have become. You do not need to prove it through words or achievements. It simply exists. And because it exists, you are free to act, create, and lead from a place of certainty. Now reflect carefully. Every step of this journey, from the earliest small actions to the consistent habits, the discipline, the identity building, and the strategic use of your environment, has been intentional. Every choice reinforced proof. Every repetition strengthened self-trust. Every challenge faced added depth to your foundation. And it all began in private, quietly, silently, deliberately. That is the paradox of confidence. The louder the world demands it, the quieter you must build it. The more public the pressure, the more private the preparation. Confidence is strongest when it is forged in solitude, in repeated proof, and in disciplined action. So now ask yourself, where are you investing your energy? Are you chasing temporary recognition, fleeting validation, or external approval? Or are you committing to the quiet, consistent, internal work that leads to mastery? The answer defines your future confidence. Because mastery, unlike temporary bursts of emotion or external success, is permanent. Not permanent in the sense that life becomes easy, but permanent in the sense that you can rely on yourself in every circumstance. It is a foundation you can return to again and again. It is proof that you have become someone who acts, who trusts themselves, and who faces challenges without hesitation. And when you reach this point, you finally understand what confidence truly is. Not a performance, not a feeling, not a display, but an internal state shaped by proof, reinforced by action, and solidified through mastery. This is the silent power of confidence, the confidence that is built quietly, privately, deliberately, and consistently, the confidence that no challenge can shake, no circumstance can erode, and no external factor can dictate. This is the confidence you have been building from the very first small action, every private decision, every moment of discipline, every time you face discomfort. It is yours, fully. And now you can carry it into every area of your life, silently powerful, steadfast, and unshakable. Because true confidence was never meant to be loud. It was always meant to be mastered.